Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. I think my mom was cursed by a Wendigo. TW. Mentions of animal abuse/dismemberment. Every family member of mine, including myself, has had an encounter with the paranormal or supernatural at one point in their lives. From the little people that kept my great-aunt company as she lay dying in a hospital bed to myself making successful contact with something through a Ouija board. But this I don't have an explanation for. Even as someone who believes in these things, I always try to ration the mundane over the magical. However, after delving into learning more about a certain mythological cryptid, I can only come to one conclusion surrounding my mother's passing in the spring of this year. I used to live in the mountains in Northern California with my mom, who was a single mother, and the place we stayed at was a house that was owned by my aunt. It was a historical house with well over 200 years of history on the property and being rebuilt and altered through the decades. This house was situated in the thick of the wooded mountain, and forest stretched for miles beyond. In the front ward was a wall about 3 feet high, and on top was a hill that inclined upwards back some 10 yards of grass that terminated at a fence. Beyond that was just woods and a small hiking trail. When we moved into this house, I was just starting first grade, and what I'm about to tell of has been happening regularly until we moved out when I was in middle school. My mom was also deeply spiritual and also believed in the supernatural, though I don't think they knew what she had possibly encountered. When I was sent off to school, my mom stayed back at the house to do paperwork for an ongoing custody battle. When she was alone or when I was out of sight was when it started happening. She would hear my voice shouting for her from the front yard, yet she knew that I was not home at that time, nor would I have been. The first few times it happened, she wrote it off as her hearing things, since she is hard of hearing in one ear. The longer we lived there, the more seemingly uncomfortable things we would feel or experience. I had never liked that house. I always felt like I was being watched in one way or another, especially outside, coming from just beyond the property fence. A few times she was with some family friends out on the back porch that overlooked some sparse patches of forest and the valley. She would invite them over when I was at school still, so that she can focus of relaxing. That's when she heard my voice again, calling to her from the wooded patch. This time her friends also heard it. Confused, they asked my mom, shouldn't I have been at school at that time, and why was I playing outside in the woods? I wasn't, and she told them that. At the same time, around the times that my mom supposedly heard my voice, a foul smell would linger around the property. When I would come home, or find my mom if I was off inside the house, my mom would keep asking me if I was really at school today, and I didn't just skip school. I always answered honestly that I was at school. The most vivid memory that my mom had of an encounter with an unwelcome friend on/around our property was one night in 2014, when I was in 4th grade. A magnitude 6 earthquake hit an adjacent county. Our property was very close to that county, and she was literally shaken awake. Note: the bedroom we were sleeping in had the bed right next to a glass sliding door that faced to the backyard. She tried to wake me up, but I was a heavy sleeper. Then, she smelled that foul scent again. 2 yellow eyes in our backyard caught her eyes. As she stared at this intruder in our backyard, the aftershock hit. Thankfully, we were far enough away from the epicenter that the only damage done to the property was a crack in the tiles of the backyard deck, and also along the floor surrounding a pool we had. Another incident was that we used to keep chickens for eggs for a few months. We had the family handyman build an automatic closing coop so that the door would close just before sunset, to keep the chickens safe from mountain lions and other things that would eat chickens. along with a metal fenced, not the chicken wire kind, but the heavy-duty ones that are used in construction sites, coop on all sides including the top to keep out the mountain lions since a few were recently spotted north the nearby regional park. This was something that came from my own memory. At first, it was just one chicken that ended up drowned at the bottom of our pool. After that, we put a padlock on the gate to the coop. Then one late morning, I was out hunting for frogs in the pool filter when I saw my aunt, mom, and family handyman, the same one that built the coop, look at the coop shocked and worried. The metal fencing of the coop of one safe had been completely ripped open, and inside the coop was a bloodbath. I came to take a closer look at the scene when I heard the handyman say, "I'm not sure this was a mountain lion. None of the chicken are eaten or missing. Their heads are all severed, and a mountain lion would have eaten these. They don't hunt and kill for fun." We also had no neighbors or people for at least a few miles that could have played this prank on us. And the thing I remember most was not the dismembered chickens, but the smell of rotting flesh, even though the chicken looked like they were just killed the night before. Looking back, it felt like we were being taunted by this thing. Or at least my mom was for some reason. When we still lived at that house, and even after we moved, misfortune followed us wherever we went. My mom got into a 5-year-long abusive relationship and developed breast cancer when I was in high school. She was a very healthy woman with no family history of breast cancer, and it would go away and come back just when she thought she was finally done with the chemo and treatment and all that. I had at some point in my teens gotten into cryptids and specifically Native American folklore. If what I assume about her experiences are correct, I have heard that even if you evade death by the Wendigo, it will find another way to kill you. Doctors she would visit would express confusion as she was low risk in getting breast cancer, let alone having it keep coming back since they caught it early the first time. Though we had long left that house, it felt like the memories, the fear, it was always following her. In her last months alive when I was with her, she said she kept having dreams of that old house, of my voice from beyond the woods, beckoning for her to come. Dreams about a thing that looked like a man but wasn't exactly, bearing the same yellow glowing eyes she saw outside the night of the earthquake. She felt as if these reoccurring dreams were trying to tell her something. She had hoped it was something good and not malevolent. In fact, it did have my voice after all. Last year in the fires, the house burnt down. And this year in the spring, my mom passed away. Looking back, it feels like the pieces fit together for this. Everything from her diagnosis to how her cancer had behaved felt so off. It could be that she was cursed by this thing. Or maybe there was no supernatural explanation. But it still lingers in the back of my mind. Second story. I went to the woods behind my house last year with my friends. It saw me. Last year I decided to have a girls' day with my friends. This was during April of 2021, so we couldn't do much but make some baked goods and sit around talking about work and school. I really wanted to visit the woods behind my house, so I originally planned to bring all the food we made to the woods and hang out there. But unfortunately, when the day came, it was just implausible. It was cold and supposed to rain. Plus, it was a good 25-minute walk across a mucky, barren field, so I thought it was best to have the food at my house and visit the woods afterwards. I feel it's important to mention I've never actually been to the woods behind my house, so I didn't really know what to expect. I liked the spooky aspect of it, so I was really interested. After snacks and chatting, my friends and I threw on whatever shoes I could find around my house that were suitable for walking across a field. We hopped my fence and set off. Walking there was kind of unsettling, and I was kind of scared that my friends and I would get the cops called on us for some reason. One of my friends, let's call her B, was getting a little scared, and so was I. It just felt kind of wrong what we were doing. I can't explain that feeling. It's like you just know something's off. My other friends were goofing off while B and were pissing our pants. When we finally got the woods, I was kind of amazed. There was no clear path, and it looked like no one had stepped foot in the woods for over 100 years. There was a huge tree that had fallen down and was covered in moss. It looked so untouched and beautiful, it was almost otherworldly. We didn't go very far into the woods, maybe 30 meters, about 100 feet in. Nothing felt off. After about 15 minutes, we decided to head back as it was started to get dark out. As we walked, I started to get that uneasy feeling again, but I assumed it was because we were in the middle of an empty field surrounded by nothing but the forest behind us. Bea nudged me and pointed out a tree that looked a bit like a face and said she felt like something was watching us. I told her I did feel uneasy as well, so let's just go as quickly as we could back to my house. After we made it back, all was well. We chatted again for a couple more hours before everyone went home, and nothing felt off. Cue me writing this a year and a half later. I haven't been out much this summer, but last night there was a pretty sunset, so I decided to sit at the edge of the pool and walk around my backyard. I decided to hop the back fence to look out at the field again for a bit of nostalgia. As I turned around to look out the field, I noticed someone standing about 150 meters away from me. The person was dressed in brown and black, and I thought it was my neighbor for a second, so I started to wave my hand at him, which I promptly stopped. The person was way taller than my neighbor, and even though my vision isn't too good, the person was also ghostly pale. Now, I'm not totally stupid. Instead of running up to the person, I took my phone out and zoomed in to take a picture. I only took one before the person saw me and started walking towards me. Slowly, my camera on my phone stopped working, and I climbed the fence as fast as I could. As I turned around to hop down into my yard, I saw its face. It looked like the tree Bea had pointed out last year, and it was less than 5 meters away from me. It was walking so slowly, I didn't hear any running. How did it catch up to me so quickly? I backed away from the fence so quickly, I didn't want to turn my back on the thing that was behind me. Then I heard it. Its voice was lower than a whisper, just barely audible, and was coming from all directions, 1 step every night since the woods. 20 steps if I see you. I ran back inside to go tell my parents, but I didn't know what to tell them. What if it saw them? What would it do? The only person I talked to was Bea. I sent her the picture only for her to send me a question mark in response. There's nothing in the picture? What do you mean there's something standing right there? I can see it. I clicked on the picture and zoomed in on it. How could she not see it? She was there with me that day? Then it moved. In the picture. Shit. I can see it. 3rd story. I was sent to hunt a Wendigo. I failed miserably. All right, I'm not much of a writer, but I've been stuck for hours and I'm bored as hell, so here goes nothing. I'm part of a team that captures, but mostly kills, monsters. And when I say monsters, I mean legitimate monsters. Stuff like chupacabras, manticores, werewolves, and so on and so forth. We're not unique, not by any means. There are hundreds of teams dedicated to the same thing all over the world. And my team isn't necessarily the best one out there, but we're good. And I trust my teammates with my life, all 4 of them. We've been on dozens of missions, and I used to think that we were prepared for anything. But now, one of my teammates is dead, and the rest of us are injured and stuck in the back of an armored truck with a 3-meter-tall Wendigo screeching outside. I'm going to be stuck here for the foreseeable future, and my teammates are all unconscious, so I've got nothing but time. I guess I'll start with how I got into this business and how it works. It'll explain how I got into this mess. I was in the military, not going to say where, and I was good. Extremely good. Incredibly gifted in terms of both physical and mental strength. Good with weapons too. I never thought it would really mean much. Where I come from, the military is conscription-based, which basically means that, if you're a man, You're mandated to drop everything and serve in the military for 2 years. If you don't go to the military, you go to jail instead. Fun. I figured I'd just serve my 2 years, finish, go to university, get a degree in mechanical engineering, and live out the rest of my life. I thought all my military accomplishments would serve for nothing but just an interesting tidbit about me. But clearly, that wasn't the case. Just a few weeks before my 2 years were up, I was pulled into a room, which I never knew existed, and I was immediately met with some of the highest-ranking officers I've seen in my life. Initially, I thought they found out about the empty shell casing I smuggled out from a live firing for a souvenir a couple months ago, and I was bracing myself for a court-martial and a trip to the detention barracks. Hey, I never said I was good at following rules. But that wasn't the case. They told me how impressed they were by my performance, and they were transferring me to a special team based in another country, one whose name I've never heard of, made up of elite soldiers from all over the world. I would go there and continue training for another 4 years, and I would actually be sent out on real military operations. And I wasn't allowed to say no, either. Initially, I was pissed. I had dreams, aspirations, stuff I actually wanted to do. Not to mention I had just got a girlfriend, and we were still in the honeymoon phase. The idea of just dropping everything and being forced into military service, again, was maddening. That, and the whole real military operations thing. I mean, sure, I could hit 100% of the targets at the firing range, do 95 clean push-ups in a minute, and run for kilometers with a 15-kilogram bag strapped to me. But that doesn't necessarily mean I could fight terrorists or anything. I wanted to argue, make them change their mind, think I wasn't a good fit for it. Maybe even tell them about the shell casing. But before I could voice my protest, they showed me the pay. Oh my God, the pay. So much money. And they promised it would only go up. Now, where I live, the cost of living is high. Very high. Not to mention, I was a little money hungry at the time. I didn't want to become an engineer for the sense of accomplishment, if you get my meaning. So not only did I need the money, I wanted the money. I had a lot of stuff to pay for. I would have to get a house, a car, and a wedding ring for the girlfriend. Yes, I was planning on proposing. Oh, and also steroids. I take steroids. So, I went along with it. I got all my things together, hugged the parents, kissed the girlfriend, had one last drink with the boys, and went off to another country. Went to a base in the middle of nowhere, with a team made up of 20 people. Yup, the whole base for 20 people. I can still hear the Wendigo screaming. It's very distracting, just so you know. Back to the story. And then the training started. It was brutal. Way worse than anything I've ever experienced. At least in the regular military, safety is a concern, albeit not a huge one. Here, safety was unheard of. The trainers, which is all I can call them, since there were no ranks on the base, pushed us as hard as humanly possible, and sometimes inhumanely. Once, they gave us no food for a week. Another time, they snuck into our bunk and turned OFF the safeties on our guns. We had live rounds loaded, by the way. We were supposed to keep our guns loaded and with us at all times. We got screamed at for hours for that one. They said if we were real soldiers, we wouldn't have let that happen. Many times I wanted to punch one of them right in the face. It's a literal miracle everyone made it to the end of training with their sanities and bodies intact. Maybe the steroids had something to do with that. I had to hide my use back in my home country, but here they actively encouraged it. They even bought us needles and everything. Reason being was, according to them, if injecting yourself with a gram of testosterone every week makes you run faster, lift heavier, recover quicker, and just basically be a better soldier, then you should do it. At the end of training, we were briefed on our operations too. They told us we were going to see and do things we never would have imagined. They told us monsters were real. Initially, we all laughed, and then were punished for laughing. They made us run 5 kilometers, then continued the briefing. They told us we would be hunting monsters, but only those that were a threat to people. And we wouldn't always kill them, sometimes just capture them. Because some monsters, like minotaurs, produce certain substances that can cure disease. Meanwhile, peaceful creatures, like Sasquatch, would be left alone. All of this said with a straight face. I still thought it was all a big joke. I mean, who wouldn't, right? But then they showed us videos. I still remember them, frame for frame. Monsters eating people, tearing people apart, nightmare stuff. And not to mention the video quality. You can't fake stuff that well. They sent us on our first mission a week after. Put us on a private jet and flew us off to Japan. Said we were looking for something called Gashidakuro. Supposed to be a giant skeleton that eats people. Which I mean, how do you keep the public unaware of something like that? A skeleton as big as a tree, just walking around, straight out of Clash Royale. What? So I clash a little. Big deal. I've got to hand it to the cover-up guys. They don't get the credit they deserve. We found it eventually. 2 of them, actually. Wasn't hard to be honest. They were over 20 meters tall in the middle of a rice field. According to legend, these things were supposed to only attack lone travelers. The village they had just massacred said otherwise. They saw us, let out a bellow, and sprinted straight at us. We ran straight towards the nearby tree line, hoping the oak trees would impede the monsters. One guy wasn't so lucky. He was always the slowest during group runs. He got snatched up, and the skeleton just bit his head clean off. At least his death was instant. Thank God for that. Speaking of instant deaths, I can still hear that Wendigo shuffling around outside. Maybe I should speed up my riding a bit. We took down both of the monsters with rockets. Now, according to folklore, from hundreds of years ago, the Gashidakuro are supposed to be invincible. But they didn't have RPGs hundreds of years ago, did they? When all you've got is a spear against a skeleton 15 times your size, it's going to seem invincible. Props to people from ancient times. I don't know how they survived against these things. So that was my first encounter with the supernatural. We went on a lot more missions after that. Eventually, as we got better, we started getting split up into smaller teams. I started to actually enjoy it. I was only interested in money in the beginning, but a sense of accomplishment started coming with it. I remember the first time I really felt proud of what I did. We were in some town in Greece, with a really small population, less than 10,000. There was a manticore absolutely demolishing the place. It was tearing its way through a row of houses when we came across it, busting through a wall while a family on the other side was screaming for help. We took it down and went to check on the family. There was a little girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old who ran up and hugged me. My heart melted a little, I'm not going to lie. I've always been fond of children. Her parents were probably scared of us, a bunch of guys with heavy weaponry and armor, but she wasn't. She just knew we saved her life, and she was thankful. I really thought about the impact of my job on that day. So, I was making bank and loving my job. Life was far from perfect, but it was good. And then one day it came. The mission that screwed up my entire life. We were sent off to Canada. There was a confirmed Wendigo presence in a forest very near a town, and people were starting to disappear. We had to take it down ASAP. Not a capture, a kill. Now, this Wendigo was particularly interesting. It used to be a human. That's pretty rare, apparently. Most Wendigos were made by a spirit in the sky or something, and the real ones are a lot stauncher than the people who become Wendigos. This specific Wendigo used to be a guy named Ned Terrell. He went off into the forest with his girlfriend, ironically, to look for a Wendigo, and they got lost in a blizzard or something. Then a few weeks later, he turned up and started eating people. A bunch of doctors just figured he lost it, and they locked him up. They said he had convinced himself he was a Wendigo, and that it was best for everyone that he stay locked in his room for the rest of his life. But the thing is, Mr. Terrell wasn't so crazy after all. A couple months after they locked him up, the doctors noticed something. He was growing. A lot. Now, Terrell was already a pretty big guy. About 2 meters, if I remember his profile correctly. Then one day, one of the doctors, I think his name was Bowman, realized he was a lot taller. They measured him, and he was 2.18 meters tall. A while after that, he was 2.34 meters. But even though he kept growing taller, he kept losing weight. Started at svelte 80 kilograms. He was pretty underweight after living in the forest and eating people for a couple months, and ended at 56 kilograms. And he kept getting stronger too. One day he leapt at the guards and took a chunk out of one guy's arm. Thank God for tranq darts. They hit him with enough stuff to take down an elephant. That was the day they decided they had to transfer him out to a more secure facility. They knew they were dealing with something they didn't have the ability to handle. So they threw him into a truck and transported him to a maximum security prison that was a couple hours away. At least that was the plan. Halfway there, he ate the driver, the guards, busted out and ran off. Pretty soon, reports of a giant emaciated man running through the forest and roaring his head off reached us. We sent a scout, who identified it, or I guess him, as a Wendigo, and my team was sent in. Now, according to legend, humans can turn into Wendigos when they choose to resort to cannibalism instead of starving, or they can be possessed and forced to commit cannibalism by Wendigos. Which one is Terrell? Personally, I'm hoping he's the second option. At least that way, he dies with his humanity intact. The sounds outside have died down a little. Mr. Terrell must have gotten bored. I can relax a bit. We went out into the forest, the 5 of us. Body armor, assault rifles, grenades, rockets, all of it. We thought we could take him. We could not. It started off so slowly. We found its tracks and started following them. There was a blizzard going on, which is apparently something Wendigos can do. There's a blizzard going on now actually, but my team had no problems. We followed them in our armored truck for an hour or so. Then all of a sudden, it was just on top of us. Never saw where it came from. Unbelievable speed. It tore my teammate out of the driver's seat and swallowed him whole. He was a big dude too. 1.9 meters tall and built like a young Brock Lesnar. Just got swallowed up, starting from the feet. He screamed the whole time too. I'll never forget it. The Wendigo just unhinged its jaws and leapt on him. One movement, he was suddenly swallowed up to his waist. The truck crashed, and the rest of us jumped out and ran for cover. I'll admit it. Even professionals get scared. We just watched our teammate get eaten. Took a while, too. He was screaming and begging, one arm pinned to his side, and the other flailing around. He had broken the number 1 rule, always have your gun loaded and with you, so there was nothing he could do. It took us a few seconds, but we opened fire. The Wendigo was squatting on top of the truck, its jaws now around the guy's chest. We killed our teammate, but he was dead anyway. We just granted him mercy. We emptied our mags at that thing, and we only hit it twice. Visibility was poor due to the blizzard, and like I said, it was fast. Seriously, faster than anything I've ever seen. It stood up, and it was huge. Absolutely dwarfed us. It was thin as a rake too, ribs nearly tearing through its skin, skeletal arms, kneecaps very visible. I saw a photo of a family of Indian villagers during the Madras famine once. It looked just like them. Very human looking. Just looking at its face, You would think it was just a starving man. I saw a picture of Mr. Terrell back when he was a regular guy. You could definitely tell it was him. It tipped the truck over and sprinted straight for us, lashed out, tearing through our armor like it was cardboard. One of us, I don't even remember who, got a grenade off. Unfortunately, not a direct impact, but still made it back off for a while at least. We jumped straight into the back of the truck and put it into lockdown mode. If you're slow and can't figure out what lockdown mode does, it locks the truck down. Metal covers sliding over the windows, a bunch of electronic locks, makes it a fortress. Unfortunately, it also prevents it from driving, because the wheels withdraw into the body. The Wendigo started slamming on the doors, but it couldn't get in. It's strong, but not that strong. So that brings us back to where we started. I sent a distress signal out a while ago, but I got no response. The blizzard may be blocking our communications. The snow's coming down really hard. It's freezing, even with the truck's heater. I'm really hungry for some reason too. I can't have been here for more than a couple hours, but I'm absolutely starving. Even the time I didn't get food for a week at base wasn't this bad. I'm ravenous. But there's no food. And I sure as hell am not going out there. I won't make it very far. My teammates are still out for the count. I don't really know what to do now. I can't hear the Wendigo, but as long as the blizzard's here, I know it's out there. There's a video feed of the outside, but I turned it off. I need to conserve energy. The last I saw the Wendigo, it was eating the snow my teammates' blood spilled on. This thing leaves no traces. It would probably lick blood off the walls if it could. It can't get in, but I can't go out. The situation seems pretty hopeless. But hey, if you're reading this, that means I made it out. I'm typing on the Notes app on my phone, so the only way for someone to see this is if I get out of here. I'm going to take a little break and think about what to do now. Goodbye. Hey guys, I found this story on a phone in the back of a wrecked truck I came across while hiking through the woods. I called the cops as soon as I saw it, but I snooped through it to find any valuables. Sorry, and I found this. What do you guys think? It's probably just some BS, right? I mean, there aren't any bodies in the truck, or blood even, which, if this is real, should be the case. There was a really heavy blizzard a day ago, but that's just regular Canadian weather, right? Wendigos and monsters, they're made up, right? Maybe some aspiring writer crashed and decided to just type a story while he waited for help, then just left his phone and walked away? That doesn't make sense. And the truck was crazy. It was more of a tank than a truck. I don't think riders would really drive stuff like that. And there were a bunch of weapons too. I didn't touch them though. I'm wearing pretty thick gloves, but I can't risk getting any of my DNA on a firearm. I'm out on probation right now. There were prints leading away from the truck at least. Only one set though. And they were huge. I mean, seriously. This guy was big. Barefoot too. I hope he made it out all right. I'm walking back to my house while typing this. I still don't know what to make of it. The only way it adds up is if the story is real, but it can't be, right? I mean, I would have seen something by now. Whatever. I already told the cops and they're on the way. They'll figure it out and I'll read about it in the paper tomorrow. I'm just going to focus on getting home now. It's starting to snow pretty heavily again, and the wind's picking up. I hope it's not a blizzard. Fourth story. The woods. This is only part of my story. I made a throwaway because I haven't shared this with anyone before and would rather not have my friends know about it. I just wanted to see if anyone here would take interest. It happened a long time ago and really traumatized me. I'm still trying to get some details straightened out in my head, and I thought writing it down might help me, and that maybe some people out there can help me understand why this happened to me and my family. My curiosity has always gotten the best of me ever since I was a child. My mom knew that I could get in a sticky situation easily, so she always had certain rules set for me. I wasn't allowed to wear sandals when I played. I was very clumsy. I couldn't go past the tree at the end of the driveway for fear I'd end up stricken by a car. My younger brother and I couldn't go outside to play without telling her or my dad first. But most importantly, I was to never, ever go into the woods behind our house. As a kid, the thought of all the great adventures to be had in that forest drove me crazy. They were just beyond my reach, taunting me. I'd stare longingly at the woods sometimes, and often walked along the edge and peered in search of fairies or dragons or gnomes. No matter how badly I wanted to go in, I knew it had to be dangerous. Things began to get strange after my 10th birthday. I remember because my parents struggled to get me to go to bed due to my massive sugar rush from cake and ice cream, and the distraction of my new toys wasn't helping either. When I finally crashed, I curled up with my new doll in my bed. I woke up to find that it was still dark outside. When I reached for my doll, it wasn't there. I did a quick search around the bed and on the floor and found nothing. At this time, I was afraid if I got out of bed in the middle of the night, a monster could reach out its hand and grab me, so I decided I'd look for it in the morning. When I laid back down, I noticed that my room was freezing cold. Then I saw a fluttering out of the corner of my eye. I jumped at the sudden movement and realized it was my curtains being blown by my open window. The window I had left closed. The cold, crisp night air of autumn filled my room and I shivered, but not just because I was cold. I crept toward the window, not so worried about the monsters under my bed anymore. I poked my head out and peered around. Nothing. All I could see were the woods across the yard. I tried to avoid looking at them too much at night. Although they're fun and exciting when it's light out, they take on an ominous tone at night. I shut my window and got back in bed. Suddenly, I realized how exhausted I was, and next thing I knew, I was fast asleep. A few weeks later, after I had mostly forgotten the window incident, I was playing outside with my little brother along the line of the forest. We were playing pirates and sword fighting with sticks. Shiver me timbers. Ye land lubber, ye have to walk the plank, I said in my best pirate impersonation. But I don't want to walk the plank, sissy, said my little brother, Toby. You either walk the plank or go into the woods. No. Mommy says that's a bad place, said Toby in a hushed voice. Then you have to walk the plank, Toby. Rules are rules. Toby's lip began quivering and he sniffed and said, Fine then. I'll go into the woods. I began to regret challenging him, but I wanted to know what was so bad about those woods. He took a step past the tree line and looked back at me. He took a deep breath and a few more steps. You have to go all the way to that big tree there, I said, pointing to a giant oak that had been stricken by lightning and hadn't grown leaves in years. His eyes widened at my words. But that's Dash, he began to protest. Then he huffed and said, Fine. I watched him walk cautiously toward the giant, bare tree, and I refused to take my eyes off of him. Then I heard a sound like I'd never heard before. My mother came screaming across the backyard for Toby to get out of those woods, fear heavily coating her words. When Mom was halfway across the yard, a pained scream escaped from the trees, and I realized I'd turned away from my brother at the commotion my mom had made. I turned back, and he was nowhere in sight. My mother continued to scream and yell for Toby, shaking me and asking what had happened to him. I shook my head over and over. I didn't know where he was. Another scream pierced my ears from the far left in the woods. My feet knew how to react before my mind, and before I knew it, I was fighting off briars and overgrown weeds to find my baby brother. My mom yelled my name now, but I ignored her. I got my brother in this mess, and I was going to find him. My hands were shaking, but my legs were moving faster than ever. With tears running down my face, I called out to my brother. I stopped to listen for a response. Instead of my name, all I heard was a whimper. I moved toward the sound in front of me. I heard the snap of a twig and a rustle, then stopped. My blood turned to ice, and I held my breath. The sound had come from behind me. I turned slowly and saw my brother in a heap in front of the big oak tree. I ran to him, and as I got nearer, I noticed how wrong the position of his body was, how labored his breathing sounded. Then I heard the awful gurgle with each breath he took. In what seemed like hours, but in reality was only seconds, I finally got to his side. His head was turned away, and he didn't move to look at me. He didn't move at all. He was completely still. I cried harder now and realized that whatever did this to him was still here in the woods with me. I felt a hand pull me hard and screamed at the touch. I realized they were pulling me away from the dense forest and into my yard. It was Mom. "No, let me go. I have to get Toby," I screamed. "You can't. I'm not losing you both," she said, her voice thick with anguish and determination. I kicked and screamed with all of my might until we were inside. I didn't know what to do, so I just collapsed and sobbed. My mom called my dad at work, and he came home immediately. I don't know how we managed to get his body from the woods. Maybe we didn't get it out after all. We had a funeral for him, but the casket was closed. I don't know how involved the police got either. I was too young and heartbroken to pay attention to those kinds of details. The night after the funeral, I awoke in the dark again. I rolled over and realized my window was open again. My hair stood on end, and I let out a small cry. My heart stopped at the sight of what was sitting on the foot of my bed. It was my doll, the one I had lost. But it wasn't my doll at all. Its eyes had been gouged out, and something was wrong with its smile. I reached out with a shaky hand, tinted silver in the moonlight coming through the window. I pulled the doll closer to examine it. Sewn into its mouth were teeth. Teeth that hadn't been there before. Real human teeth. I threw the doll on the floor and began to sob uncontrollably. I screamed for my mom, and she came to my rescue and turned on the light. She took in the room. The open window letting in the freezing air. It was winter then. Me, crying on my bed. The doll, laying on the floor with teeth scattered about from where it had fallen with so much impact. She picked it up and looked at it. She gasped and covered her mouth. Tears began to stream down her face. She dropped it and ran out. I picked it up to take a closer look in the light and noticed something I hadn't before. The teeth were small, like a child's. And among the teeth was one with a silver crown, just like Toby had. Fifth story. The Thing in the Fields. When I was young, I lived on a farm in rural Oregon with my parents. I was the only child. We weren't a big commercial farm, just a family type thing. We had 5 cows, 3 horses, a small herd of goats, 2 dogs, and 1 chicken coop. We also had some Indian runner ducks we kept mostly as pets. We didn't really make any money off the place, just enough to sustain the animals and a little extra for ourselves. Money enough to take a decent vacation every couple of years. Dad had his other job in town, an insurance agent. He was the only one around really. The town wasn't more than about 1,500 people. Mom gave horse riding lessons as well. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. It was really an easy life, or at least it could have been a lot worse. I went to school. Dad went to work. Mom took care of the animals. Then we all had dinner together every night. And I would go to bed while Mom and Dad had a beer or 2 and watched the news. Sometimes at night I would hear things outside. Mostly just normal stuff. The cows or horses would get spooked by a coyote or something, or I would hear the dogs chasing a rabbit, barking their heads off. Every once in a great while we would find a chicken dead. Dad would always tell me about it, but never let me see the body, although I asked frequently. He would keep Mom and I inside until he had gone out, did whatever he did with the body, throw sawdust over any blood, and then life would go on as normal. I assumed it was foxes, as I had seen a couple of them out in the pasture over the years, slinking around back and forth through the grass. The summer when I was 10 years old, I remember helping Mom change the bedding in the horse stalls when we heard a huge racket going on outside. If you've never heard the sounds of a horse in pain, you don't want to, trust me. It sounds almost like a person screaming. Well, that's what we heard, and one of our horses, the Palomino, came running into the barn with a wound on its left thigh. For long marks, like claw marks, ran across its body for about a foot. It had blood running down its leg and was limping. I was so scared by the sight of that much blood that Mom locked the horse in a stall and made me go inside with one of the dogs. She told me to lock the door and stay inside until she came in to get me. I did. Eventually, Mom came inside and told me that the horse had hurt itself on the barbed wire that ran the perimeter of the pasture. We owned more land beyond that, but it was mostly forested. I guess I believed her at the time, but at dinner that night, I noticed Dad was being particularly quiet and Mom was talking a lot more than she normally did. She was being really animated, and I noticed that Dad had gotten his rifle out and set it by the back door. Usually he only did that when the coyotes had been acting up. That night I went to bed as normal, but I had trouble falling asleep. I turned on my desk lamp and decided to read comic books until I got tired. I have a very vivid memory of reading Uncanny X-Men and hearing the back door open. Looking out, I could see my dad by the porch light, lighting a cigarette and holding his rifle under his arm. He started walking over to the driveway and then turned to follow the fence line. I couldn't sleep until I knew Dad was back safe. I kept coming downstairs with the excuse of getting water to see if Dad was back in the house yet, and each time all I saw was Mom sitting on the couch in the living room, staring at a blank TV screen and looking worried, sighing occasionally. Eventually, about 4 in the morning, I think, Dad did come back, and I was so tired and relieved that I fell asleep as soon as I knew he was home. He never told me what he did that night, but I never thought to ask. 2 months later, I was back in school. It rains a lot in Oregon in the fall, and this day was no different. All I could hear from my bedroom was rain hitting the ground and the aluminum roof of the chicken coop. There was light thunder in the distance, but it was slowly getting closer. I thought I had heard a coyote yapping out around the garage, or it could have been one of the dogs. I looked out, straining my eyes to see whatever there may have been. In a brief and distant lightning flash, I saw something. It looked almost like a person, but hunched over, and with a long torso. It was tall, taller than Dad, who was a good 6'4", at least. I just barely caught a glimpse of it on the near side of the garage, then the light faded, and I didn't see it again that night. There was another dead chicken the next morning, the third in just as many weeks. I told Dad what I had seen the previous night. The color went out of his cheeks momentarily, until he told that the storm must have been playing tricks on me. I accepted that. For months after that, we lost a cow. It was in the middle of the night, and we all woke up at the same time. There was a lot of noise in the pasture, but only briefly. The cry of a dying animal and a primitive, guttural yell that I had never heard before. Dad rushed up to my room. I could hear him running up the stairs to my room. He had his rifle in hand and opened my door. He saw I was awake and told me to stay inside no matter what and try to go back to sleep. I don't think I have to say that sleep wasn't really an option any longer, but I did stay in my room, with a blanket held tight around my shoulders and staring out the window. Probably about 10 minutes later, I heard gunshots in the field. I don't know what he was shooting at, whether it was whatever had attacked the cow or the cow itself, trying to put the animal out of its misery. Dad rarely, if ever, talked about that night. I later found out that he had gotten to the cow only to find it ripped open on the ground, bleeding out from its torso. The shots I heard were him shooting the cow in the head. It kept going like that. For years. A chicken or a duck here and there. Something bigger only very rarely. It sounds absurd, but I almost came to think of it as commonplace. I only ever caught glimpses of the thing until what comes next. It terrified me. It happened in the middle of the day, over the course of a long weekend when my parents had gone to Seattle to see my uncle, who was ill. It was on a Saturday afternoon. I was 17 years old. I was out in the barn putting out food for the horses and the dogs. The horses were running around out in the pasture, and the dogs were asleep in the corner of one of the horse stalls. I heard something rustling in the tall grass outside in the pasture. The dogs looked around a little bit but didn't seem to mind. I assumed it was just one of the horses waiting for me to leave so they could eat. I kept going about what I was doing, and in several minutes I thought I heard breathing. I turned to look, and it was standing in the door, tall as hell, even hunched over. The sun was streaming in behind it, lighting up all the dust in the air around it like some kind of sickly halo. It was looking at me, considering me. Maybe it was trying to decide whether or not I was food. I remember swearing, turning, and running as fast as I could for the house, not even thinking. Panic causing my legs to move. It was behind me, not even breathing hard. I heard its feet hitting the ground in a constant rhythm. I got to the house, opened the door, slammed it behind me, and locked it as fast as I could. I tore through the house, locking every door and drawing the blinds on every window. I could hear it snarling outside the back door. The dogs were barking at it, but they wouldn't try to attack the thing. It was too big, and they knew it. It roared at the dogs, and they ran off, probably to hide in the pasture. I went to my parents' bedroom and got Dad's rifle. I loaded it, set up a chair in the living room facing the back door, and waited. It started prowling around the house. I could hear its feet crunching on the gravel of the driveway and the wooden planks of the back deck. It kept walking back and forth. I thought about trying to look through a window to see it, but I was too scared. Eventually, after hours of hoping it would go away, the sun went down. I turned on all of the outside lights and went up to my room. I opened my window with the rifle in my hands, hoping to be able to pick the thing off from above. I saw it lurking just beyond the glow from the porch light. It had long, sinewy arms and walked on bent knee. It was by the chicken coop. Then it disappeared from view. I heard the chickens squawking and screeching. The thing reappeared with a dead, bloody chicken in its hands. It bit off one of the wings with jaws that were dripping with slime and drool and let the dead bird drop to the ground at its feet. Then it looked at me. Its eyes made contact with my eyes. It turned away again, back to the chickens. It came back with another bird, mutilated it in front of me, and dropped it. It went back again. And again. I should have taken a shot at it, but I was astounded and confused trying to figure out what it was doing. Then it hit me. It was a show of power. It was showing me that it was stronger than me, that it could do whatever it wanted to do because I couldn't stop it. At the same time, I felt powerless and sickened. Powerless because what it was saying was true. If it was just that thing in me, I wouldn't stand a chance. Sickened because I realized what kind of intelligence it would need to be able to convey that message. The thought shook me out of my stupor, and I remembered the rifle at my side. It was heading back to the chickens, and I decided that when it came back I would take my shot. It strode back to the porch, almost arrogant, walking on bended knee with those arms so long that the chicken was nearly dragging on the ground. I raised the rifle up to my eye and tried to steady myself. My heart was beating so hard I could see the rifle shaking ever so slightly in rhythm with each heartbeat I could hear pounding in my own ears. It raised the body to its mouth, and just as it was about to put the chicken's head inside, I squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gun echoed in the now shattered quiet of the nighttime standoff, and I heard it howl. A painful, loud, startled howl. I had hit it on the outside of the shoulder. It ran off into the night. I never saw it again. It was still out there, though. It still killed chickens and other things, more often than before. I'm writing all of this now because my parents died 3 weeks ago. They were killed in a collision with a drunk driver. He survived. They left me the farm, and I intend to live here with my own family. I'm 32 now, and I work for an Oregon Fish and Game office in Salem. I'm married to a wonderful woman named Stephanie. We have one son, Zachary, who is 4 years old. We are expecting a daughter in 4 months. I've come to the farmhouse alone today. I told Steph that I just wanted some time alone in my parents' house to deal with some emotions. She was very understanding. I've come back to claim what is rightfully mine. I have Dad's rifle next to me on the table, and it is almost dusk. I've also brought several portable halogen lights to set up around the house, and my own shotgun. I'm borrowing a handgun from Joe, a guy at Fish and Game who I work with. When I am done typing this account of my memories, I will print it out and leave it on the dining room table, along with my wedding ring and my key to the safe deposit box where my will is kept. Everything is loaded and ready. Hopefully I will return here to collect these things and nobody will ever know I wrote this. Steph, in the event that you are the unfortunate soul to find this, which I'm terrified to think seems a likely outcome, the thought of you having to go on alone hurts me more than anything in this world ever can. Know that I love you more than anything, and I hope you understand that I am doing this to keep you safe. Zachary, I love you and can only hope you grow up to be a good, kind-hearted, and strong man like your grandfather was. To my unborn daughter, if I don't live long enough to meet you, it will be the single greatest regret of my life. Tell the police, tell Fish and Game, call Joe. He's one of the few people who knows about this. Make the situation known. Eventually someone will kill it, even if it isn't me. Goodbye for now. 6th story. The Thing in the Woods. Throughout my life, I've had numerous encounters of the paranormal and supernatural kind. Some I've been able to explain away after careful thinking and debunking. Others are still unexplainable to this day. This story is one of the latter. Back when I was 19, I had just made the decision to join the military, so I was still living with my parents until I shipped to basic training. My family itself is a military one, so we moved around a lot, this being one of the last places we moved to before my dad finally retired. It was a small city in South Carolina, not naming the city for private reasons, and the house itself was relatively young, which was located in the middle of a forest at the bottom of a hill. We could still see our neighbors, barely through the trees. Right off the bat, I knew there was something off about that place. Looking at pictures of it before we moved, a voice in my head was practically screaming, "It's in the woods. It's in the woods," over and over. But only when I saw the outside of the house, not the interior. Once we got there, my mother had an odd experience when a police officer pulled up and said he was just checking things out. We never saw him again. I didn't spend much time outside, but when I did, I would sometimes get a sense of something mischievous hiding in the trees, beckoning me to come with it, almost like it wanted me to play with it. Had I been younger and didn't know the things I knew about the paranormal, I might have gone with that feeling. One night, I was woken up by scratching and rustling outside my window. For reference, this was a single-story house, so I got up, hoping I could catch a glimpse of some wildlife, like a raccoon. I tiptoed to the guest room and peeked out the window, only to back away less than a second after I pulled up the blind. But that was enough to sear the image in my memory. It was crouching down. I know this because I could make out the outline of its knees and shoulders, but standing, it would have been tall. I want to say it was covered in fur or hair, but it was too dark to see. The only thought going through my head was it saw me. I quickly went back to bed and somehow got back to sleep. I didn't say anything for a while, until my mom started saying she was experiencing things. Not as numerous as me, but we began swapping stories. One morning, close to my leaving, I was home alone and doing laundry. The light in my room hadn't worked since we moved in, so I used a bedside lamp. The view from the laundry room was such that I could see down the hall, but not into the rooms. I saw more light than usual coming through my room, so although I had left my bedside lamp on. Walking into my doorway, I looked at the lamp and it was off, but the light was still in my room. I looked up, and the light that hadn't worked for months was blazing bright. I turned the switch off and texted my mom, asking if she or Dad had fixed the light in my room. They didn't. When I finally left that house, things switched from me to my mom. She would write me letters telling me about what was going on. One night, her and my dad were talking by the front door when they heard someone run up on the porch and began rattling the doorknob. My dad quickly threw the door open, but there was no one there. My parents moved from that house soon after. I don't know what was around that house. It wasn't human by a long shot, but I hesitate to say it was demonic in nature. It was something of the land. 7th story. Why I don't go into the woods anymore. My mother moved out when I was young. Not young like infantile, but like 6th grade young. I knew what was happening. She moved into a house that was tucked away into the woods, only reachable from a dirt road that branched off of the main one about 2 miles away. The house was secluded in the woods. The move was shocking to say the least. Everything felt as if it happened so quickly, over the span of only a few months. It felt as if out of nowhere Mom was moving out and restarting her life. Only now, 8 years later, do I realize how tough that must have been on her, and I regret being the little asshole I was at the time. But going back, the move was a real shock. It took getting used to sleeping in a new house in another bed, without my dad. Luckily, though, I visited each parent often, splitting the week 50-50 with each parent. I made friends with a pair of brothers who lived at the end of the dirt road that I was situated on. Those 2 boys were probably a big reason I was able to adjust well with the divorce of my parents. We would often spend hours, whole days, playing in the woods that surrounded our house, discovering cool rocks and building forts to hang out in, trying to find and corral turtles from the various ponds and swamps scattered throughout the woods. We lived the life of your cliché group of pals. We bonded over wrestling and riding our 4-wheelers throughout the woods. Our go-to spot was the quarry located about halfway between our 2 houses, but tucked deep into the woods, only really accessible through backed rails and ATV paths. It must have been easily over 100 years since the quarry served any real purpose. We would spend so much time in the quarry, we would often bring spare gas tanks to refill when we eventually drained our own by trying to see who can hit the biggest jump. The quarry was our sandlot, our barrens, our true secret fort. I was playing outside on a Friday evening. It was maybe about late September or early October. The sun was still high in the sky when I got back from school, and I wanted to make the most of it. My friends went to a different school district. Based off of where my mother lived at the time, I should have been going to their school as well, but since my father still lived in my previous school district, it just made it easier for me to attend the same school that I have been attending. Because of this, my friends didn't get home until about an hour and a half later than I did. Because of my forced solitude while waiting for my friends to show up, I was left to my own devices. Whenever this happened, it usually resulted in me wandering through the woods directly behind my house looking for cool deer bones or trying to start a fire in the backyard with the limited knowledge that I knew from binge watching various survival shows. Today simply became one of the days where I wandered through the woods waving a big stick around as if it were a machete. After what felt like maybe 15 minutes at the most, I had stumbled my way to one of the points of interest that me and the boys would often visit. The abandoned mobile home was a cool spot due to the mystique surrounding it. Every visit to the trailer resulted in at least a handful of ridiculous conspiracy theories about the origins of the people inside, how the trailer even got into its location in the woods in the first place, because there was really no road up to it. However, as I began to walk around the back of the mobile home, something was different from the previous visits. The door to the trailer was open. Being the little kid that I was curious about everything. When I should have went back home and waited for my friends to return in order to relay my findings, I instead went in alone. Peering through the doorway, the dirty inside to what was the beginning of so many conversations began to finally reveal itself to me. You entered yourself into the kitchen area. Covered in dirt and grime, leaves and various piles of raccoon droppings, the kitchen still resembled something you'd find if occupied. What lay in the sink was a single set of dining ware. One fork, one spoon, one plate, etc. To your right after passing through the doorway was the living room, or the saddest possible excuse for one I have ever seen. A ragged, stained couch sat facing out across a window which took up nearly the entire wall. A single nightstand lay next to it, and that was all. When I walked through to the bedroom, the breath was punched out of me. Tied to the bed frame was what only slightly resembled the deer which I believe it once was. The large, half-wet skinned deer lay on the bed, contorted into something so inhumane, it would be imprinted on the insides of my eyes even up to now. The deer's contents lay spread out over the carcass and left sprawling onto the floor, already stained a dark crimson from previous instances. The head of the deer was tore off at the base. It hung on the wall above the bed, its black eyes staring into my soul. The wall was painted with smeared blood trails and claw marks cutting deep into the wall. I stood frozen. I tried to scream. I tried to make some noise at least, but I just stood, locked in a gaze with the black void staring back at me from the wall. I couldn't move no matter how hard I tried. I tried to run, but could only shake as the deafening quiet of the forest surrounded me. A shriek like none other echoed throughout the woods. The sound of everything I had ever feared finally manifested itself. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. Whatever banshee in the woods made that horrible sound shook me out of the state that I was in. I rushed to the door. Getting home was the only thing that mattered. Home was safe. Mom would be there, and she'd know what to do, and I'd be all right. I passed through the doorway, but on the first step down I sensed something. Something had possessed me to stop and look. What I saw was indescribable. Not of this realm. Not real. About 500 feet into the trees, stood hunched over and leaning from a tree was nothing I had ever seen. The creature was merely a silhouette, not black in color, but merely void of all light. It was the shape of a man. The limbs were all bent at unnatural angles and irregularly long. The face of the creature was what still haunts me today. It was merely flat, empty of all features, except for a large, gaping mouth. The creature's neck twitched with seemingly uncontrolled spasms, shaking its head violently, the actions which would snap the neck of any man. I watched as the monster's mouth stretched wide and let out another shriek. The snapping of the creature's neck whipping the shriek in all directions. It lunged forward, sprinting at me as it convulsed. Everything in my being told me to run away, to move, to do something, but again, I froze. I gasped. A deep, violent inhale kick-started my body. I turned and I ran as fast as I possibly could. Tree after tree passed me. The sound of the beast roared behind me. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my neck, but it never reached me. It was toying with me. It wanted to play with its food. It wanted me alive on that bed, just as the deer had been before it had its entrails ripped from it. I ran as fast as I possibly could. My feet couldn't keep up. In an instant, my foot had hit a log buried underneath a pile of leaves, and I hit the ground. I looked up, and in a blurred vision I saw it. The monster stood over me, shaking maniacally as it screamed. The only thing I could do was turn my head, to hopefully see nothing as I faded to black. I began to close my eyes out of fear when I saw two helmets ride towards me. I turned my head back towards the monster, and it was gone. It had disappeared. No trace of whatever that thing was that had almost killed me. I lied in the leaves, paralyzed from what had just occurred, the fear still weighing heavy in my mind. My friends gave me a ride back to my house. When I had tripped over the log that was hidden in the leaves, I had twisted my ankle and wasn't able to walk on it. After a well-deserved lecture by my mother about not going into the woods alone, me and my friends stayed in the house until it was time for them to go and for me to go to bed. I woke up that night in a cold sweat, desperately in need of a drink. I hobbled into the kitchen and began to fix myself a glass of water. That's when I made the mistake of looking out the kitchen window. On the other side of the fence, it stood there, shaking violently in the moonlight, fixated on me. The next thing I knew, I blinked and it was gone. My mother moved in with her new boyfriend not long after my encounter with whatever hunted inside those woods. That blood-curdling shriek still haunts me to this day. I've moved to the city now in the hopes that whatever that thing was can never reach me here. And I pray that no one ever has to hear the scream. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.